and we'll get things started. Welcome, everyone, to Reedsy Live. Hello everybody, welcome to Reedsy Live. My name is Martin, I'm from the team at Reedsy, and you've joined us once more for another edition of Reedsy Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today, it's all about the publishing, as we talk about the secrets, the inside goss about writing a book proposal that will get you published. Assuming that you have a good book. That goes without saying. Thank you to everyone joining from around the world. Please give us a like and a subscribe if you think you're going to enjoy this. Or if you're holding off judgment, I'll give you another reminder later, so no worries about that. But it is now 8 o'clock where I am here in the UK, which means it's noon in the Pacific, 3 p.m. on the East Coast. I think it's about 12:30 in India. 3 a.m. in Hong Kong and China, and 7 in Australia. So, I shan't waste anyone's time. I'm going to bring on my guest, who is a writer and art historian. He is the best-selling author of more than 20 books, including the Pulitzer-nominated The Collector of Lives. As a professor, he has taught for Yale, Brown, and the University of Ljubljana. His latest book is The 12-Hour Author, Everything You Need to Know to Get Published and Become a Successful Writer. Well, if that isn't exactly what we're here for, please welcome Dr. Noah Charney. Noah, how are you doing?
Martin, thank you so much for hosting me, and it's such a treat to be doing my first Reedsy Live. I'm a veteran Reedsy ghostwriter and editor, but this is a special treat because I love teaching, and I've never had the capacity to do it through Reedsy, so very cool. I think it's also my first live stream. I'm used to boring old Zoom and that sort of approach.
Oh, really? Well, you're going out to the world to, at this point, 280, 290 people, but a lot more people will be tuning in later. Are you in Slovenia yourself right now?
I am. I'm perhaps your first Reedsy Live guest from Slovenia. I'm American, but I've been in Slovenia for more than a decade, and I'm a big fan, so coming to you from the Alps.
Oh, wonderful. Is the bookcase behind you designed to look like it's on a slope, or?
It is well spotted. Most
I love
people
it.
think that they had a little too much to drink before they tuned in, but it is in fact at a slope along with the mansard roof. So well spotted.
This is, yeah, I'm going to have to sort of get a small tour from you later. It looks great. But yeah, we have loads of people joining in. I've got your slide presentation, so I'll be behind the sort of curtains operating the sort of pulleys and stuff. So let me know if you need anything. Otherwise, everyone, I'll be keeping an eye on the comments. We'll have a Q&A at the end. So either save your questions or I'll try to keep a little pin on it. But yeah, no, I'll set you up and feel free to take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining me. So I'm a bit odd as a Reedsy ghostwriter and editor because I have all these different hats I wear. In addition to doing that, I really do that for fun and to help other authors get the ball rolling on their projects, because there's so much that I learned about publishing in the field that I wish I had been taught ahead of time. It would have saved me a lot of time and effort and would have streamlined my own career. So I've now published more than 25 books of my own, and this is the latest one, The 12-Hour Author, Everything You Need to Know to Get Published and Earn Money as a Writer. And to me, this is an important thing, is everybody wants to get published, and you should be able to earn money as a writer. And there are various ways to do it, but there are all sorts of tips and tricks that I wish I had been told ahead of time, and I put them all in this book. So today, what I'm going to talk about more specifically is the power of a great book proposal and what goes into them. Now, book proposals are something that I had never heard of, and I'm impressed that more than 3,000 of you signed up for this Reedsy Live. That's a huge number, especially considering that not that many people know about book proposals. So you did very well to recognize that this is something relevant. People come to the realization of how important book proposals are and what they are, usually after the fact. And sometimes people spend a great deal of time writing an entire nonfiction book and only then realize that nobody wants to read it. They just want a proposal for the book that will be written in the future. And that's a different approach from fiction. If you're writing fiction, agents or publishers want you to have written the entire thing for it to be absolutely brilliant, and they just, do one more draft, edit, and then it's ready for action. But for nonfiction, they do not want you to have written the book. In fact, that's considered a negative because the publisher wants to have some feedback into the content of the book. What they want is a book proposal, which is essentially a pitch about what the future book will be, plus a writing sample, usually just one chapter. And these can be as short as, the very shortest, a sort of light version that I'll show you tonight, can be as little as about 2-3 pages. But usually they're between 2,000 and 10,000 words long, mostly depending on how long the writing sample is. And these proposals are in many ways more important than the finished book itself. And so we'll talk about why. Martin, can we go to the next slide, please? Just very briefly, some of the other things that I do, and I have this very diverse background. I wear lots of hats. So I'm a TV presenter. I do things like on BBC, Discovery, History Channel, the great courses. I also write scripts for TED. I host BBC series like this one, China's Stolen Treasures, which you can listen to. I'm also, believe it or not, ambassador of tourism for Slovenia, where I live, which is totally a non sequitur, right? But it's one of the things that I really enjoy doing is talking about the country I live in, of which I'm a big fan. And I also teach for the Smithsonian, for Yale University, and for the National Gallery UK, teaching art history. So tonight we're talking about writing as a special sort of refreshing thing for me. And we'll go one slide further. And I have all these books now. Almost all of them are to do with art history, some of them to do with Slovenia. And a number of them are in a series called the 12 Hours. So I have the 12-hour art expert, the 12-hour film expert, and now the 12-hour author. So let's focus in on the first part of our talk. If we'll go to the next slide, Martin. So we're going to divide this talk into 3 parts. The first one is to help you understand why book proposals are so important, to give you a preview behind the scenes of what happens at a publishing house that is interested in acquiring a nonfiction book. And then we'll look at what needs to go into a book proposal. And then we'll finish with some tips and tricks about how to make really winning book proposals. And honestly, this is one of the things that I do regularly for clients via Reedsy. So clients will hire me to ghostwrite or edit or writing coach or some combination, the whole book. But what I often do and actually recommend is that they first hire me to help them write a really winning book proposal. And part of that is I offer to do things that are basically, instead of an agent, I basically write the proposal with them, and then I find them a publisher. And it would be a separate talk to talk about the difference between agented submissions to publishing houses and the ones for which you don't need an agent. But aside from the biggest trade presses, you do not need a literary agent, but it helps if you have someone who's sort of presenting you, who's an established figure, and I can fulfill that role, and I can get the editors who already know me from my own books and from past collaborations. They'll read what I suggest to them because they are aware that I would only bring them something of merit. And then so step 1 becomes we work together on a book proposal. And if it's successful, then they submit through Reedsy a second brief for a separate work package to actually write the book together. So they can be 2 separate things or as one more elaborate work package over the course of a year. So the benefit of the book proposals is they're concise, and if you have enough experience making them, it doesn't take so long. But if you've never made one before, what goes into them? Okay, so before we look at the content, what happens on the path of a nonfiction book? So very important, the first one. No manuscript is needed yet or even wanted. So if we go back in time, my first book is my only published novel. It was called The Art Thief. It came out in 2007. And I was very lucky. It was a big bestseller. It's published in many languages. And I also got lucky because at the same time as it came out, my work as a professor, I'm a specialist in the story of art crime, so art theft and forgery. And it was written up, my academic work was written up in the New York Times Magazine. And I was suddenly overnight became the go-to expert in art crime. And to me, that was very fortunate. This is just prior to the social media era. So being featured in the New York Times Magazine was something that immediately got you in everyone's mindset in a way that today news happens. It's such a cycle that people pick up on news and then forget about it much more quickly. So I got very lucky there. But all my other books, so we're talking about 24 of them now, are nonfiction. And for my second book, I thought this is going to be great. I'm going to write a nonfiction book. It's the story of the most frequently stolen artwork in history. It's called The Ghent Altarpiece. The book is called Stealing the Mystic Lamb. And I wrote the whole first draft, and then I showed it to my literary agent, and she said, "Fine, but I need a proposal." And I said, "What's a proposal?" And so she had to explain to me the process. And this is why I wish I had a book like The 12-Hour Author that would have explained all this to me ahead of time. And I would have probably saved about a year of time, because what we needed was the proposal. The publisher does not want a manuscript. They get too many submissions to read manuscripts. Reading the first chapter or two is not sufficient for them to know, is this a book we want to publish? What they want is a pitch. And if you were pitching a film, you might imagine like a 2-minute elevator pitch. If you're pitching a book, it's similar, but much longer and more elaborate and requires more thought. In the book, The 12-Hour Author, I also have a whole section on how you pitch article proposals, so article ideas, to magazine and newspaper editors. And there's a whole section on that that's a quicker process, quicker turnover, shorter pitches rather than elaborate proposals, but the concept is the same. The editor needs content, and you need to tell them in a quick, concise way that's punchy and shows that you know what you're talking about, what your text will be. And in this case, they just want, the elevator pitch version, but because it's a book, you also need to show them that you didn't just come up with this idea on a Thursday and send them a submission on a Monday, that it's deeply thought out and that you did research, at least at a preliminary level, to know what will go into the book. So step one, you don't need the manuscript. Step two, the only thing you need here is a book proposal, but it's for any nonfiction book. Fiction's a separate issue. We don't talk about that today. I was just talking with Martin. If you enjoy this, then I'd be happy to come back and give some more of these talks and talk about different aspects of writing strategies and publishing strategies, but today just nonfiction. So any nonfiction book you want, you still need a proposal. You need a proposal whether you're trying to submit to a traditional publisher. You also need it if you want to do a hybrid publication. So that's a hybrid publication. Many publishing houses offer basically you pay a small fee to cover their initial expenses, and then you get to skip over the queue and effectively get your book fast-tracked into publication. That's a hybrid publishing approach. They still need a proposal. The only type of publishing for nonfiction where you don't need a proposal is self-publishing, because you can publish whatever you want. You're not trying to convince an editor and their team of the merit of your book. So whether it's academic or trade nonfiction, or a work in translation, or an image-heavy book. As a professor of art history, I'm writing lots of image-heavy books. They also need proposals. You need the book proposal. It's a necessary first step. So who sees the book proposal? It goes either to the acquisitions editor at the publishing house, or if you have an agent, you send it to an agent, and then they would send it to an acquisitions editor. Acquisitions editors are usually departmental, depending on the size of a publishing house. And you can submit yourself, if you have a book proposal, to any of dozens of very good publishing houses, hundreds of publishing houses, any of them except for the biggest trade presses. The biggest trade presses will not accept unagented submissions because they would just get too much material thrown at them. But there are loads of really big publishers who will accept unsolicited submissions. You don't need an agent, but you do need a really strong book proposal. And this is any independent press, any academic press, any university press, and any small-scale independent, or even big-scale independent publishing houses, like the one that publishes the 12-Hour Author, Rowman and Littlefield, which is the biggest independent publishing house in the US, and it was just bought by Bloomsbury, and Bloomsbury also will accept your submission. So you don't need an agent in those cases, but you do need a really strong nonfiction book proposal. So the acquisitions editor is the only one who's going to see it at first, and they have to love it. They have to think it sounds great, that you sound like a good person to write the book, and they need to feel like it's not duplicating what's already published or too far outside of the parameters of what that publishing house publishes. And if they like it, what's the next step? Okay. If they're enthusiastic, they'll write you a little response, and they'll say, this sounds great, and do you want to do a call, this sort of thing. And then if you want to move forward with it, then the editor will bring the proposal to their team. And this is a cliche, but it's often true. Monday mornings, everybody at the publishing house has their Starbucks Grande Mocha Frappuccino. And at 9 a.m., they sit around a table in the meeting room. And they go around the table, and the acquisitions editors will stand up and talk about which proposals they received that they think the publishing house should consider. Now, this is a little bit old-fashioned. Maybe these days they may do it using Slack or in a virtual meeting. But let's say back in the 90s, this is how the New York publishing world worked. So what is your real job with the proposal? The job of the proposal is, one, to get the acquisitions editor really excited. And the acquisitions editor, if they like something, they're going to forward the proposal to the rest of their team. The team is different departments. There'll be publicity and marketing. And as you may know, in books, those are two separate things. We tend to use them interchangeably in everyday conversation. But in the publishing world, marketing is promotion that does not involve the author as a necessarily present. So advertisements, for example. And publicity is promotion that does involve the author. So something like I'm doing right now, or a book signing, or a podcast interview, that sort of thing. And so those departments will get it. Accounting will get a copy of it. They're also going to send it to, the publisher and the editor-in-chief. And everybody's going to get a copy of the proposal, but I really doubt that anybody's read it. So it's one of those things, if you get too many pieces of paper and you don't yet know if they're going to be relevant to you, you might just glance at them in a cursive manner. So certainly the acquisitions editor, if they're excited enough to bring it to their team, they will have read it. But so what do they do now? Your job with that proposal is to make it as easy as possible for the acquisitions editor, who is already enthusiastic, to stand up at that meeting and in about 2 minutes verbally give a pitch for that book that you would like them to take on, and have it be as compelling as possible for the rest of the team who probably haven't read the actual proposal. So there's some strategy here. And if you're the type of author who, when asked by a friend, what are you working on? And you begin this by saying, oh, it's tough to explain. That's not going to work. That's not going to work in this field. It's not going to get you anywhere. You have to be able to have a really concise and eloquent, punchy, and immediately intriguing pitch for the book. A sort of one-line or a tagline like you might have for a film or a product. And just to give you an example, I mentioned this first book proposal I did for this book, Stealing the Mystic Lamb. And the pitch is effectively a one-liner, but it's immediately intriguing. So the pitch was, this is the true story of the most frequently stolen artwork in history, which is also arguably the single most important painting ever made. That is, in one sentence, something that summarizes the book and I think makes it sound immediately intriguing. And that's the kind of concise, punchy summation that your book proposal should make easy for the editor to articulate. So that punchy summation can and should be in your book proposal. But it helps if your book is the sort that can be concisely and punchily summarized. So if it's a type of book that's more theoretical and sprawling, that's okay for academic books, but it's a harder pitch. And at this point, once you've won over the acquisitions editor, they need to then win over their team. Now, at the meeting, if they've given the pitch that I think this sounds great, this is going to be awesome, then the whole team dives into doing an analysis that we authors never get to hear about. And I used to teach a master class for the Guardian newspaper, which I write for occasionally. And it was in London. It was called How to Write About Art. But in practice, it was actually basically about how to write winning book proposals. And I co-taught it once with my own editor at Phaidon, which is a famous art publisher. And she brought in this piece of paper which had some parts blacked out. And it was the actual worksheet for one of my books that she had done with me at Phaidon that had some information that I was still, even co-teaching this workshop with her, was not allowed to know. And that was all of the financial commitment behind the scenes on the part of the publisher is predetermined before you get a contract and based only on your book proposal. Remember, for nonfiction books, they don't want you to have written the book. They want the proposal, very well thought out, for a really cool idea that you've clearly thought deeply about and understand well, plus a sample chapter. That's it. And the commitment on the part of the publisher is based only on that potential, the potential energy of that book proposal. That's why it's so important. And they will already determine how many copies they think they can sell, what the print run's going to be, if there are images involved, which is the case in most of my books since I'm an art historian, how much budget they're going to put in for that, how much budget they're likely to put in for publicity and marketing. That could change, but they put in a rough estimate for that as well. And it's all based only on the proposal, the potential energy of the proposal, the assumption that the book will live up to the excitement that the proposal has induced. And that's the goal, of course, to make a proposal that isn't just functional, but gets the publisher excited. Because publishers have a sort of a ranking system. And you may have heard the term front of catalog. This is an old-fashioned term now, but it refers to literally the front sort of 10 pages or so of a print catalog the publisher would put out that would be representing the books they were most enthusiastically promoting from their own list that season. And so your goal is not just to get published, that's tricky enough, but to get published and be front of catalog, which is a shorthand for being one of the books that season that the publisher is really pushing. Because let's be honest, the publisher almost entirely determines how well a book sells. It's probably, I'm not sure of the statistics, but I guess about 80% of the books that sell well, that's based on the publisher saying, we are going to promote the heck out of this and make sure it sells well. And probably about 20% are surprises, things that slip in under the radar because, Oprah recommends them, or a film gets made of them, or the stars line up, this sort of stuff. But most of it is due to the publisher, and the publisher's decision, we're going to promote the heck out of this, is based on the proposal alone for nonfiction books. So based on that, they can also possibly offer an advance. Now, this is one of the reasons why I publish now about 25 books. I've lost track, but only one's a novel. When you write a novel, you're supposed to write the whole thing and then find a publisher for it, and you're effectively being paid retrospectively for work you already completed. For nonfiction, you get the contract based on the proposal, and then you go write the book after. And so logistically, it's easier to make a career as a writer writing nonfiction, because step one, I write a book proposal. Step two, I get a publisher excited about it. And these days, because I'm an established author with a track record of bestsellers and whatnot, I get an advance. And the advance is usually the estimated royalties that they think they would owe the author for the first year of sales. Now, for nonfiction books, advances are usually from 0 to about 20,000. That's normal. And anything above 20,000 for a nonfiction book is considered quite good. But the benefit of the proposal and the advance system is it doesn't take a huge amount of time to make the proposal, because it's, let's say, 3,000 to 5,000 words long. And then you don't do anything more on your book. You don't take any more time off of work necessarily until you get the offer of a contract. And with the contract comes an advance, or at least one hopes it does. You need to have a super sexy book proposal or a track record to get these advances. But when you do, that effectively gives you money to take time off of other projects in order to actually write the book. Then when the book comes out, you sell books, and when your book has earned back the advance that you got, then you start to get royalties from that point on. So that system of effectively write a book proposal, get an advance with a contract, then actually write the book using that advance to take the time off of other projects, that's logistically easier, as you can imagine, than fiction, where you have to sort of take a year off, write a novel on spec, hope to get paid afterwards retrospectively for that year that you spent writing it. So I'm talking about this because the book proposal for nonfiction in many ways is more important than the book itself. There have been book proposals that sold for a big advance and they never earned back the advance because either bad luck or the book didn't live up to the excitement generated by the proposal. And that happens. And publishers understand that's par for the course. But the importance of that book proposal cannot be overestimated, because that's where you get the publisher excited. Okay, next slide, please, Martin. So a little behind the scenes, almost an urban legend among publishers. On the left, this is just one of the contents pages for my 12-hour author book, if you're curious what's covered in it. But on the right, so I mentioned that my old literary agent had to explain to me what a book proposal was when I had written the whole book already for Stealing the Mystic Lamb. And she did something that she probably wasn't supposed to do, but I understand a lot of agents do this. She gave me 5 book proposals by other authors, each for nonfiction book, and each of which had sold for more than $100,000 advance, which is very unusual for nonfiction. And one of which had sold for $1 million advance, which never happens with nonfiction. And this is the intellectual property of the authors. I'm guessing that they would be both flattered and dismayed that literary agents are passing their proposals around. But these proposals were renowned within the industry as being extremely good and exemplary. And what I did was take all 5 and I did a deconstructionist analysis. The issue was they were all quite different. They were different in format. Some of them had long narrative cinematic openings instead of a sample chapter. Some of them had no sample chapter but had very long chapter summaries that were multiple pages long and really were engaging, and that was in lieu of a sample chapter. They were quite quirky and different and showed a flexibility, but when I deconstructed them, I realized that all of them had certain consistencies. And I was working backwards because I couldn't find any book, or at that period any website, that broke down how to write a winning book proposal, which is why I wound up writing this book, The 12-Hour Author, trying to offer this up to others. So the one that I'm featuring here is the book that you see on the right, and it was one of those 5 book proposals, and it's the one that famously got $1 million advance for a first-time author who no one had heard of. And it was Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. And this book proposal was immediately engaging. I could see what all the hype was about. It was just 40 pages long, and those 40 pages got Joshua Foer $1 million advance. Now, it remains a question reasonable to ask, did the publishing house ever turn a profit on a book that got $1 million advance. And you'd have to look at it from book to book. But what happens is the publishing house, the bigger advance they give, the more they are forcing themselves to make sure that the book does well in order to earn back the advance. So it's kind of like putting themselves in a pressurized position voluntarily and deciding, we're going to make sure we get this book and we are going to make sure that it earns us money. So there's usually a direct correlation between a big advance and a book doing well. There are big advances that have not earned back, but essentially publishing houses won't let a big advance book fail for them. So this was a really interesting type of proposal, and it's something that I'm going to recommend you consider if you're doing trade nonfiction. Effectively, this book by Joshua Foer, which I highly recommend, is about the science of remembering things, how memory works. And he decided to tell that story using an AABA format. And this is a format I break down in detail in the book, but the basic premise is that you have an A storyline and a B storyline. It's the same basic approach for fiction as well, like the Da Vinci Code works in the same format. And the two storylines run parallel, but with nonfiction, one storyline is a first-person narrative with Joshua Foer acting as his own experimental guinea pig and going from someone who would forget where he put his car keys to training for the Memory Olympics, which is a thing I've never heard of before I read this book, and competing in the Memory Olympics. So it's a first-person narrative of his own experience trying to improve his memory. And the B storyline is the art and science of memory, is effectively the academic side of it. So what are mnemonic techniques? What is the memory palace? What happens in the brain when we try to remember things? How do we memorize things better from a scientific perspective? And the two chapters alternate. And particularly because he's an effective writer in the A storyline, his own story, he ends his A storyline chapters, so chapter 1, 3, 5, 7, each of them ends with a cliffhanger. So we want to read through the even-numbered chapters, the B storyline, in order to get to the resolution of the cliffhanger and rejoin his own story. It's a very clever system, this AABA. It works in fiction and nonfiction too. And it was clearly indicated from the book proposal that this was the formula, and he successfully got me as a reader of the book proposal hooked and wanting to read more, which is the goal of a winning book proposal. Okay, next slide, please. So what goes into a book proposal? It's, of course, would take far too long to read through all of this, and I pulled up some examples that, if you like, after this, you can pause the video and zoom in. It may be a little bit small to see depending on your screen. But in this book of mine, I include many examples of successful proposals, including the very proposal for this book. And I first include a light version, because the light version is effectively what I do now, but as an established author, but it gives you a shorthand for what you need to put into your own book proposal. And if you answer these questions, then just expanding on them becomes a full book proposal. So in the book proposal, light version, you need the title and subtitle and the author name. And then you have to answer some basic questions. And these are questions that you can answer in a spoken way if a friend or theoretically an editor asks you. But you should write up the answers to these questions because it helps you brainstorm and formulate and shape the book in your own mind. So there are questions like, why is this book needed? Who will want to buy it and why? How is it different from other books on the same topic? So what's unique about your title? Then imagine that your book is in our next catalog. Begin with a title that captures the tone and spirit of your book. But what would the ideal catalog copy be? Emphasize the special features or sections using bullets or in prose. So this is effectively, this is the one paragraph words that you hope your acquisitions editor will say at that Monday morning meeting with all the mocha frappuccinos, people sitting around the table to get people excited about it. They're asking, how would you write it? How would you pitch it yourself? Then they want to have a biographical statement about you as the author, specifically highlighting elements of your story, your own story, that will show that you know the material that will go into this book, that you're a good person to write this book. So for me, the art history side makes sense, but I probably would not be convincing as someone to write a book about chemistry, for example. So you want it to be linked to the subject of the book in question. They also want to have a tentative table of contents. And this is one of the big differences, really the meatiest difference between a light book proposal and a thorough, complete one. The light version, they want a table of contents. In the thorough one, they want a chapter-by-chapter summary. They'll also want a target date for completing the manuscript, because remember, nobody expects you or wants you to have already written the book. If you already wrote it, it's a sort of take it or leave it situation. Whereas if it is at the book proposal phase, then it's more of a dialogue with you and the publisher, and you can shape the direction that you take the concept. And they want that feeling that it's a dialogue. Also, you need to say if the book needs images. Remember that publishing images comes at a cost, image rights, and also in terms of printing. And it's especially important if you want anything in color. Printing a color page costs more than 10 times as much per page for the publisher than a black and white grayscale page. And so you have to have a really good reason for color images if you want them. So you would put that in. And then you also have a rough length. So full-length books can be anywhere from really 50,000 to 120,000 words long. If they're longer than 120,000, it becomes problematic and you have to sort of negotiate. Shorter than 50,000 is okay if it's a picture-heavy book, but in most cases, 50 to 120,000 words. And they'd like to know how long you expect the book to be, because believe it or not, part of their calculation at that early meeting is how much is it going to cost to print each book? And my wife does typesetting for Bloomsbury and Rowman and Littlefield, and she has given a very specific maximum page count that they've already calculated, that this book has to be, 272 pages long, and that's how much they budgeted for the printing of every page. And as the typesetter who does the interior design and layout for the book, she is not supposed to exceed that number, because each additional page is an additional cost out of the initially planned budget. So this is why you need to tell them ahead of time roughly how long you think the book will be. Okay, next slide, Martin. Now, one of the things that I include that's kind of fun in my book are numerous examples of successful book proposals, real ones. And I wound up using my own just because I didn't need to get permission to do so. And kind of fun, I include the proposal for the 12-hour author in the book, The 12-Hour Author. And I won't read this through to you now, but I have my answers to the various questions, some of which I already mentioned a few moments ago. Next slide. And one more after that, please. So we're talking about nonfiction. There are two paths to nonfiction, academic and trade. Those are the two primary paths. The academic book proposal template is much more formulaic, but it's still answering the same basic questions as a trade nonfiction. Just to differentiate, academic books are meant to expand our body of knowledge, but they are not expected to sell particularly well. Their target market are libraries, and ideally getting added to syllabi on academic courses. And if normal people buy them, the publisher's delighted, but they're not banking on normal people buying them. They also have one extra step to them. So once the team is on board, the publishing house says, yes, let's do this. There's one step that comes in between the acquisition editor and the rest of the team saying yes. And that is for an academic or university press, they cannot offer a contract unless they have 2 peer reviews endorsing the book proposal. And that is a step that can slow things down. The publishing world moves at a glacial pace at best, which can be frustrating. But for academic books, they need to find 2 peer reviewers who will, in theory, anonymously review your book proposal and sample chapter and weigh in on whether they think the publishing house should publish it or not. In practice, they usually can figure out who the potential author is, even though the author's name will be removed from the proposal. The publisher will find the peer reviewers, and they need to get 2 peer reviews. If they really want your book, they will say, can you recommend any peer reviewers? Which is basically saying, you got any friends who are qualified, who are going to endorse this so we can get a move on? If they're sort of neutral about it, then they will look for the peer reviewers themselves. If they don't get 2 peer reviews that are saying, yes, you should publish this, and they really want it, they'll go for a 3rd one as a sort of tiebreaker, but they need 2 affirmative ones. What happens almost inevitably with peer reviews, and I've done lots of them myself as a professor, you usually get a review that says, I would recommend this book for publication if the author makes the following changes. And then you get a chance as the author to say, I appreciate the reviewer's suggestions, and I will certainly take them into consideration. And then once you get the contract, then you decide if you're going to take them into consideration or not. That's the usual process. But it's important that you understand there's an extra step. For trade nonfiction, those are books where the target audience is the general public, and they try to sell as many copies as possible. And those are the ones that can be potential bestsellers. And that has a much more free-form proposal format, but you still need to answer basic questions. So it's a really good idea to kick off a book proposal with a dynamic, cinematic, narrative opening text, a piece of prose of the sort that would appear in your book. Starting that off is really good because it draws the reader in. It shows them that you know how to write well. And basically, it's like the initial hook of a song. If you like the opening 30 seconds of a song, you're likely to keep on listening. And then effectively, you turn away from the prose cinematic narrative and you turn to the reader, the editor, and you say, this book will be about blah, blah, blah. And you're describing it in a summary, like the catalog copy. You want to include key features or selling points, what makes it distinctive. Then you need, and this is what takes the longest to write and research, a really thorough, well thought out chapter by chapter summary. And it should be at least half a page about what will go into each chapter. Keeping in mind you won't have written it yet, but you need to do enough research to be able to lay out, this is what the book will be like. And I've thought about this in detail, what goes where and what to include. You'll also need to answer questions about whether there's any ancillary material like graphs, charts, images, the word count. You have a section on marketing. Now, there will be a marketing team with the publisher, but you're supposed to basically give them a little bit of a head start and suggest if there's any obvious target market. Like a colleague of mine once wrote a book about doing sport when you have epilepsy. And so there were very specific target groups like national foundations in support of people with epilepsy and athletes and whatnot, who were the obvious first market for his book. And so this is where you would put it in the marketing section. You also need your author bio, and you need a section called other relevant publications. Now, it's very important to keep in mind, and a lot of people don't understand this, in the world of books, there is no such thing as competition. If you love a subject, let's say the American Civil War, and you hear that there's 5 books about it and they're all supposed to be good, you'll buy all 5 books. It's not like a vacuum cleaner where you're going to read the reviews of 23 of them and you're only going to buy one every 10 years. So other relevant publications are books that are on a similar topic or the same topic or have a similar target audience, and you explain how your book will differ. But you should pick ones that have sold well, because the publisher will check the sales statistics as they're available, like in the Nielsen ratings. Will test the waters to give a sense of, okay, these other books that have a similar subject or target audience, this is how many copies they sold. So I'm guessing this will sell a similar number of copies. So in that other relevant publications, put in books that, would have a similar audience and that did well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for the last couple of slides, this is going to be too small to to read, but these are some narrative openings of my own book proposals, just to give you a sense of what they look like. And because I have exactly 6 minutes before I'm going to stop for the question section, I'll read just enough about them for you to get a little bit of a sense of being engaging and playful and pulling the reader in. And Martin, I think if you like, I can come back and I would do another talk for you about great openings and focusing entirely on the opening paragraph. We could do a whole hour on that because it's the most important part of your proposal and your book. But here are some that give you an example of how you can spend a lot of time devoted to that initial hook is so important, because these acquisitions editors, just like readers, they get so much material in front of them. And your proposal is one of, 32 in the editor's inbox that day, and they're looking for a reason to stop reading. And step one, you want to make sure they have no reason to stop reading. But step two, even better, give them a reason to keep on reading because they're so intrigued. So just to give you some examples of successful book proposals that got big advances, opening lines. Let's just do opening lines. As you step out of the blinding Florentine sunlight and into the terracotta-scented Palazzo Vecchio, it will take a moment for your eyes to adjust. But when they do, and the Sala de Cinquecento leaps into clarity, you may be surprised to find yourself surrounded by giants. The soaring walls of this vast meeting hall, 12,750 square feet, are painted with larger than life-size frescoes of riding and ranting warriors. 4 enormous battle scenes show the military triumphs of the Medici family, painted in 1563 by Giorgio Vasari. His soldiers bulge out of skin-tight armor as they assault a fortified city by lamplight. So that's one example. I'll give you just a few others before we stop for questions. This is from the opening proposal of the Stealing the Mystic Lamb book proposal I mentioned. Captain Posey and Private Kirstein stood inside a cottage nestled in the dark German forest, the hiding place of an SS officer and art expert who had deserted the Nazi army. Though the front line raged mere kilometers away, the cottage was a tranquil contrast to the chaotic final months of the Second World War. The home in the forest was full of flowers, books, and photographs pinned to the walls. Posey and Kirstein were American officers of the Monuments and Fine Arts Division, a group of art historians, architects, and archaeologists assigned to various Allied armies charged with protecting art and monuments in conflict zones. And one more slide, Martin, and I've got 2 more very brief examples, and then we'll pause for questions. The sky turned iron as we pulled up to the gates of the Pratolino. Rain was due, but perhaps we still had time. Somehow I'd never gotten here before. It's only 15 minutes north of Florence, and I'd lived in Florence and taught art history there. This was finally my chance. My wife and daughters, 9 and 11, were with me as we passed the gate and walked the path. We'd been driving for hours from our holiday house in Umbria back home to the Slovenian Alps, so we skipped to stretch our legs. I was skipping for joy, the anticipation of seeing a much-studied masterpiece in situ for the first time propelling me forward. I couldn't wait. That childlike Christmas morning rush was upon me. And lastly, August 6th, 2010, Stockholm, Sweden. The fog-draped evening quiet is suddenly ripped apart by a series of car bombs set off at various points around the city. The burning cars perfume the still air with a scent of scorched petrol. Sirens scream and spin. A phalanx of police cars wheels through the city, converging on the bomb sites. Surely this is a terrorist attack. The police patrols diverted to the bombings arrive and survey the charred carcasses of the cars. They cordon off the city streets a safe distance from the smoldering black bent metal, all that remains if you can spot it through the gray smoke. By the time they realize this was all just a diversion, it's too late. Martin, it's exactly 10 minutes before stopping time, as if pre-planned.
You're, if anything, an absolute professional, keeping it right on time. Thank you so much for that, Noah. As we mentioned, the link to his book is in the description below. The 12-hour author.
That's right.
So yeah, great. You can get that and check it out. Also, pinned to this conversation, people were asking for just a quick version of sort of writing book proposals. So we have our own resource from Reedsy. But if you have any questions, do send them our way. We'll take 10 minutes to answer some questions. Here is the big one that everyone has been asking. Does Memoir fall into the non-fiction proposal category, or is the submission treated more like a novel?
Patricia, thank you for asking. It is definitely in the nonfiction category. It's considered nonfiction unless it is a novel based on someone's life story, and then it's fiction. But memoir is a bit tricky because basically publishers think that people don't want to buy memoirs unless they're the memoirs of a celebrity. So sometimes when I coach authors, I recommend they avoid that word because I've heard from editors that they don't think that there's an audience for memoir. There should be, of course. There are loads of non-celebrities with fascinating stories, but I tend to encourage people to package their own story in something that doesn't overtly feel too memoir-ish because of this sort of allergy that many editors seem to have to the term.
Okay, let's see. Some people said, I have a memoir ready for copy editing. How can a proposal garner interest for an already written book? There's been variations on this. What happens if I've already written the full manuscript? Do you sort of hide that factor?
Yeah, so basically you have to work backwards. And I learned this the hard way back in 2010 with my Stealing the Mystic Lamb. If you send them the whole manuscript, they won't read it. So what you need to do is work backwards and create a proposal from the finished work. Now, that's not necessarily so hard to do. You're still going to fill out your basic proposal template. And there are templates available online. Reedsy has materials in my book. You'll find it. And it's answering questions about your book. And then the thing that'll be most time consuming is summarizing each chapter, even though you've already written the whole chapter. But what you want to do is pick the most exciting bit, the bit that raises the most tension and shows off your writing to its optimal for that narrative opening hook of around, let's say, 1,000 words. And then you have to create the book proposal out of it, and then you can have the first, say, 30 pages of your book as your writing sample as well. But you do have to basically work backwards and create a proposal.
Ed has a sort of nuts and bolts type question. His book sort of relies on illustrations. Who in the sort of process will determine who gets to sort of pick the artist and what the style is? Is that something the author will have input in?
I wish. Unfortunately, unless you are doing self-publishing or hybrid publishing, then the author gets basically no feedback at all. The only exception is if the author is also the illustrator. If the author is illustrating their own book, then there's much more potential for you to say, I'm going to write this and I'm going to illustrate it. But if you have a book like a children's book that needs illustrations, the publisher does not really want your opinion, and they're just going to find you an illustrator of their choice when the time comes and show you and say, you like this, don't you? It's the same, unfortunately, with book covers for fiction or nonfiction. We authors rarely get any feedback. They usually make one and they say, you like this, don't you? And you say, yes, I do. And that's the end of it.
Have you ever had them come back and...
You can suggest things, but unfortunately, they don't want to hear from us.
Have they ever come back and changed your title or heavily suggested a revised title?
Titles are definitely a collaboration. And this is something important. With traditional publishing, it's much more of a co-production between you and your editor. And that's a reason why these days, a lot of authors who could find traditional publishers actually prefer a hybrid approach, because the hybrid approach, you have complete control. And so that does appeal to people sometimes, even though they could go the traditional route.
I was sort of, from my perspective on that, there are really good hybrid publishers out there, but they're sort of few and far between. Most of the ones you'll encounter who call themselves hybrid publishers are just vanity presses who have just rebranded themselves. We've got some good ones here. Give me 1 second. Here's from Renee Smith. What role does having a platform, social media following, mailing list, evidence of speaking gigs, etc., play into the acceptance of a book proposal?
It's a great question, Renee. It shouldn't have any, but unfortunately these days it does. But it's more so in the last, I'm going to say, less than 10 years. It used to not even be something that people would notice. But these days, honestly, a lot of publishers are basically being lazy. They want to publish something for someone who already has an automatic platform of their own, and they're just going to create a product that they're going to sell to that platform. And it's a shame. But in terms of platform, I've heard many editors say that they're basically not interested unless you have a direct outreach to at least 10,000 people. And that's really a shame because it's an arbitrary number and it's the publishers being a bit lazy. But that's what they're looking for, to have a sense that, okay, through your own organic outreach, we're going to sell X number of copies. I wish there was a better answer for you.
I think, a lot of people are taking this, I guess, in the modern sense to just mean, oh, you need a massive Instagram following. But, I suppose like that sort of myth has been sort of dispelled a bit. There are like plenty of authors who have 50 million followers on Instagram. They get a book deal and suddenly not even a percentage of them buy it. And, as you say.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of ridiculous that some of them have that expectation, because there's no guarantee that it's going to translate into anything.
Let's see. Here's a good question. Meditations with Julie Scon, the new Marcus Aurelius. After writing a proposal draft, would you recommend hiring a pro to fine-tune the final proposal before submitting?
I mean, I do, in fact, recommend that. The thing is that you can absolutely do any of these things yourself, and you should feel empowered to. But it's always going to be helpful to hire someone, ideally through Reedsy. I'm supposed to say that, right, Martin? You know why it's good? It's people who are really experienced with this will know what works best and what doesn't. And if you've already written a full proposal draft and you're basically looking for someone to fine tune it, it's not going to be very expensive, because they're not writing it from scratch. They're not doing research for you. And proposals are short. Proposals are like, let's say, 3,000 to maybe 10,000 words, if that's mostly the writing sample, but 3,000 to 5,000 words or so. So it's worth investing in because it's not that expensive because of its brevity. And it's so valuable because it's so important to get that enthusiasm of the publishing house.
Just one or two last questions. Here's one. Stephen asks, can this proposal be done online or should it be printed and sent?
The days of printing and sending are no longer with us, Stephen. So you should make basically a Word file, and you can send it as a Word or a PDF. And it's usually sent as an attachment and sent directly to an acquisitions editor. And you can find them. You can look at publishing houses. You can look at publishing houses that have published books on a similar subject. And then the websites usually have the submissions addresses of the acquisitions editors available. And one hot tip I'll give you, avoid sending a submission to a generic email like submissions@ or info@, and always try to pick a specific editor and send it to their personal email addresses, because the others go in a slush pile and are read by the intern who sits under the ficus plant in the corner and can't make any decisions without other people being involved. And you want to go straight to someone who can say yes.
God, it's a real fancy publisher. They still got ficuses. Just one last one. Justin asks, do proposals have to follow a formula in the way they appear, or can we be creative with the layout?
So you can be creative with trade nonfiction, but not with academic. Academic is what they want to sort of be serious, and they're much more conservative. Um, with a crazy layout that would be really eye catching, it runs a risk of being hit or miss. But something that has a slightly quirky, I think, is a safer bet. So something that looks totally wacky, that's maybe like Sideways or I don't know. Some people will like it, and some people will be immediately turned off and might not think that it's serious enough. So I would be a little bit cautious about that. It's more about the content and the concept being exciting than the way the proposal itself looks.
Cool. And we have just now hit the top of the hour. Noah, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for sharing this. Noah's book, The 12-Hour Author, is now available online and in good bookshops. Yeah, and check out all of his other great stuff. I've got Wait, I realised I was muted there. There are multiple ways you can contact him through his Instagram, through his Substack, but most importantly through Reedsy. You can find the link to that in the comments in the description below. Thank you all for tuning in for this one. Thank you so much, Noah, for joining us. I hope to have you again at some point soon. Good night.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye bye.